9:09 in St. Louis. McGraw under the weather today. Martin Kilcoyne in charge until 10. Then Josh Gilbert will handle the Kilcoyne show. Don't be confused. John Carney in at 12 noon. We're coming to you live from beautiful Richmond Heights. We just decided it's Richmond Heights. It's high above the Galleria here at the First Rule Film and Broadcast Studios, the University Tower, home to the McGraw Show. Online at ktrs.com. We continue here in the 9 o'clock hour, and we welcome into the studios here Thomas Harvey, who is the executive director, co-founder, Arch City Defenders. Thomas, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Arch City Defenders. How did it begin? What's the mission? Let's explain that to folks.
So it started in 2009. I co-founded it with two of my law school classmates, Michael John Voss and John McCanner. And we started it right after we finished law school in order to fill a gap in legal services for the indigent in St. Louis. The difference between us and, say, the public defender, which handles criminal cases at the state level, and Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, which handles civil cases, is that we do both. We handle civil cases and criminal cases, and we attempt to integrate social services, just meaning social work care. For our clients, typically they're homeless folks, so they're trying to get off the streets, and they want to get into housing first, jobs, and treatment to keep them off the streets.
So people who wouldn't otherwise have what we would probably call fair representation or a place to turn legally.
Right. They would. There's no other organization that does the type of work we have all in one place. Before we existed, they had to go to 2 or 3 different places in order to get that work.
How do they find you, especially if they're homeless, or are there advocacy groups who know about you at this point that sort of funnel them in your direction?
Yeah, it starts with the social work agency. So part of the reason that we ended up knowing a lot about the municipal court structure is a place like St. Patrick's Center would call us and say, we've got Thomas here. He's a homeless veteran with a substance abuse problem. We're trying to get him into housing and treatment, but we can't because he's got a warrant for his arrest in Jennings because of some unpaid traffic tickets going back 5 or 6 years. If we could get that warrant recalled, we could help him a lot more. So that's what we do. That's initially what we did was we would get that warrant recalled. And we're not talking about violent offenders here. We're talking about poor people who didn't have any money. They didn't show up to court. They didn't pay their fines. A warrant gets issued, and then once they get on the streets, they can't navigate that system on their own. They need an attorney to help. And when they come to a social service agency, that case manager or social worker, he or she doesn't know how to navigate that system either, so they need an attorney to help them out.
And let's tell people about what you guys have accumulated here, the white paper on municipal courts, sort of about a 40, 50-page glossary here of your findings. Explain to folks what that is.
Well, so the origin of it was our clients, since the first day we ever did this work, our clients have been telling us basically 2 things. One is this isn't about public safety, it's about the money. And they told us they were being targeted because they were black, and they weren't being listened to because they were black and poor. And so, frankly, they told us a lot of crazy things were going on in courts that we didn't believe. We were brand new lawyers and had no experience other than law school clinics. We didn't have much experience with the legal system. So people were telling us things like not being able to go into court with their children, being told that they were denied access to the courts on one of these payment dockets because their kids were with them. They told us that they were locked up for weeks at a time, almost a month at a time, after they had gone to court and told the judge that they couldn't pay the money that they owed. They would continue to be incarcerated. So to be real honest, we didn't believe what they were saying. I mean, now looking back on it, that was a mistake on my part, but at the time it sounded pretty shocking. So what we decided to do was organize a court watching program. And we got law students and volunteers to help us out with that. We were able to observe about 60 of our municipal courts. And then what we saw was what our clients was telling us was accurate in about 30 of those courts. We saw it pretty consistently. And so the paper itself is a result of 2 years of court observations and clients telling us things that were going on in the courts. And we had finalized all but the introduction of the paper this summer, and then we put it out for about 4 days after Michael Brown was shot.
Now, what do you do with these findings? For example, as you said, 60 different courts that you guys observed. And it was at least 30 were real specifically violating some people's rights. Illegal and harmful practices described in the court system. 3 courts, Bell Ridge, Florissant, and Ferguson. Chronic offenders serving as prime examples how these practices violate fundamental rights of the poor. And this has sort of come to light after Ferguson. And they even had the program where you could come in and sort of get some past transgressions excused, for lack of a better term. But where do you guys go? Now you have this information, you have it documented here. Can you take it to anyone and say, hey, we've been able on our own to document these violations? Can there be some changes made based on what you guys discovered?
So we've been working with John Ammon and Brendan Roediger at the St. Louis University School of Law clinics on some proposals for reform. We had developed some of our own proposals, and we've been working with them. We actually made some proposals to Ferguson. Ferguson, we requested that they issue a warrant recall program for everyone who was affected, and do essentially what was an amnesty, a true amnesty for all cases that had been outstanding at that time, essentially as an act of good faith to the community. Because just to tell you what our take on this was, unfortunately, young black men get killed in America by the police not infrequently. And every time that happens, there aren't people in the streets protesting about it, right? And so one of the questions is, why here? Why was that? Why did it turn into now going on 2 months plus of protesting over some of these issues? And our feeling was, this is at least one factor that contributes to distrust between government representatives and the people impacted by those policies. Because our clients don't make a distinction between the city council and the mayor and the judge and the police. Frankly, their contact with local government is the police and the courts. And for years, our clients have been telling us that they've been mistreated by those groups. And when a tragedy like the killing of Michael Brown happens, government needs a little bit of political capital. And when they came to the people of Ferguson and the people of the community saying, hey, trust us, it's going to take some time to get to the bottom of this, but we are going to investigate, and we're going to get you back an answer. People were skeptical, to say the least. They were skeptical. And our position is, this is part of it, right? It's not the only reason. People aren't on the streets because of traffic tickets, okay? But this is one of the reasons that there's a lack of trust there. And so taking some steps to reform the policies of these courts is one way to show you're taking seriously some of the concerns of the community.
Thomas Harvey with us here in studio on KTRS, Executive Director, co-founder, Arch City Defenders. I want to go back to something you said where police are killing young black males. Certainly, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are times where it is warranted, where they're being shot at, or there are instances where an officer's life is in question. So I do think, though, we don't want to put them all into the same grouping, where there may be, quote, suspicious circumstances, and other times it may just be self-defense very clearly documented by the forensics. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't want to just lump that in and say the police are killing young black males, because there could be specific instances of what took place.
Sure, and I don't mean to, at this point, we don't know, the investigation's not complete, we don't have all the facts. What I'm saying is, police shoot young black men in America all the time. You can say it's justified or unjustified, but the fact is, young black men are shot by police.
It takes place, yeah.
Right.
But situations are different. Right.
No question. My point is, before Mike Brown and Darren Wilson came across one another, everything we said in that paper is true. And after we find out what happens with the grand jury, the problems that we talked about are going to remain those problems, and they contribute to a lack of trust that's furthered by some of these things.
Right.
That's it. It is a factor.
The distrust, the disconnect between
right.
either black Americans or poor Americans towards authority, police, that disconnect exists. And that's why we're seeing so much vocal protest. I think it's over the system, more or less, correct?
I would agree. And I think that this is one of the things that contributes to it. Is most people don't have contact with the criminal justice system through misdemeanors and felonies. Most people don't commit misdemeanors and felonies, so they're never in court standing before a judge in Clayton or the city of St. Louis. They're in front of their municipal court judge for things like not mowing their grass, or some zoning violation, or an unpaid traffic ticket. And when our clients tell us they're being treated poorly by those representatives, it contributes to their lack of trust with that system. And their steadfast belief that this is about the money is backed up by some of the things that we saw in the budgets of the communities that we looked at. Ferguson, for instance, has municipal court fines listed as their second highest source of revenue for their city, just after sales tax. So it's $2.7 million through traffic tickets and fines. It's a lot of money. We're talking about a pretty, I mean, if I ran a business that grossed $2.7 million and my costs were around $400,000, that's a pretty good business.
It'd be fascinating to see the budgets for these municipalities and how they forecast, because like any business, if you said, all right, we'll have 2.5 million next year in traffic violations, if you're halfway through the year and this is just common sense and you're at 500,000 and I'm running the city, I'd say, well, we're way off on our budget. That just tends to lead to not just quotas, but hey, we need some more money.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest problem we see with the communities that are where we see the issues in the courts is there's a line item on a budget that says we're going to get $3 million from our courts, or we're going to get $2 million from our courts. And these are some communities where the tax base has been depleted, so courts have become a larger source of revenue than the sales tax that they used to replace a loss in sales tax that they used to rely on.
And I'm wondering, I know your expertise is in the legal realm, not necessarily government, but I'm wondering if, I don't know that a city-county merger is going to clear any of that up, but we talk about all these little municipalities, even in the policing of those municipalities. Could the county sort of override all of that? Would it fix it? Do you think there are just too many? And I should point out, too, you guys wrote in your research here that you were happy to report of the 60 different courts you studied, basically half did not engage in the illegal activity. But do you think, not that they're all rogue or renegade, but would there be an overriding system if the county sort of had more control over it, or giving these little towns too much power over their own people? Is that one of the issues here?
Well, I wouldn't say power over their own people. I would say that we put it this way. There's nothing that, there's no requirement that each one of these municipalities has its own court. They've elected to have their own court, and in part, it's for revenue. So let me say this. These aren't new problems. We found an article written in 1966 by a University of Missouri School of Law professor detailing almost all of these exact same problems. And one of the findings in this paper was these courts are just going to be used for revenue. They're not going to be used for the administration of justice. They're going to be used for the generation of revenue. And those two things should be separate. They shouldn't go hand in hand. Police Chief Tim Fitch is quoted as saying, just recently in St. Louis Magazine, saying this is abusive police practices. To have police out in the community writing tickets to generate revenue is not what police are supposed to do. Now, his position is he doesn't blame the police. He blames those communities for requiring the police to do that. And I think that's a valid point. We don't make any assertions about the individual motivations of the people within this system, but this is a system that has existed for a long time. And systemically, if you start with we need to collect $3 million, just like you said, Martin. Like at some point,
the budget shortfall is going to go back on the police to fix it, to find the money.
Right. It seems reasonable to conclude that. We don't have any evidence of a memo saying, "Hey, go out and write this many tickets per month," but it stands to reason that that's what's going on.
In the old days, you'd be on the family road trip and you'd be driving in the middle of nowhere. You get pulled over, and that's when your mom or dad would say, "Oh no," because the small town sheriff could say, well, you were going too fast, but it's $500 to get out of it. I mean, it was always random, and justice or the ability to get out of trouble was dependent on what county you were in. And it was and that's what I'm picturing now, even though this is in our backyard in the big city of St. Louis, it's sort of that same mindset that it was just random. Wherever you happen to get stopped, you're subject to whatever that random fine was. Because if you got pulled over in some county in Alabama, let's say, they might say it's $500. The next week you pull over in New Hampshire and say it's $100.
So, and I would now think about that, except you're driving on Natural Bridge and you've gone 4 miles between 170 and the city limits, and you've driven through 10 to 15 municipalities. So you're not talking about I'm in Alabama one day and I'm in New Hampshire a month later. You're talking about I'm 4 miles from the first place to the second place.
And each one has its own.
Each one has its own. You're subject to the jurisdiction of each one of those police forces and each one of those courts. Each one of those has its own policy about how much money the fines are going to be. Each one of them has their own policy about whether or not they'll accept payments. And the most important thing you mentioned is you're driving the family truckster and you get stopped on vacation and it's a couple $100. Maybe dad or mom in that version of events, they just shell out the money and you move on your way. Well, we're talking of the people that are hurt most by this system are people who can't afford to pay.
Fascinating topic, and I'm wondering, Thomas, can people see this white paper, sort of the findings that you guys were able to put together? Is there a way to see it online?
Yeah, it's on our webpage. It's just www.archcitydefenders.org.
archcitydefenders.org. Thomas Harvey with us, co-founder there, executive director. Fascinating topic. Thomas, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
All right, Kilcoyne continues in for McGraw until 10 o'clock. We'll talk. This may end up being legal as well, but the Rams' potential move. More developments over the weekend. We'll talk about that next.